The Truth of Girls.
Hi everyone, it's Sonia here. The county of Rockland in New York has banned unvaccinated children from public places. They've been having a bit of a measles outbreak with over 150 cases to date since last fall. And so as of now, for the next 30 days, children who haven't had the MMR shot are not allowed to go to school or be in public places. When I saw this, I thought a few things, but one of them was, how are you going to enforce this? Because it's not exactly like you can tell who's vaccinated or who isn't just by looking at them. So I found out a few things about why they did this, and they're saying this may be the new normal. County officials in measles-racked Rockland County, New York took the extraordinary step today of banning unvaccinated minors from entering public places. If vaccine-preventable diseases continue to flare up in pockets of unvaccinated people across the the whole country, these types of bans might become the new normal. Couple things though, this doesn't apply to adults. They say that about maybe 7% of adults are not immune to measles, if I got that right. Also, it doesn't apply to children who have medical exemptions, which I find kind of strange, because isn't it the children with medical conditions that you want to protect the most? Isn't the whole goal of this to make sure that the children who cannot receive vaccines don't get the measles? Isn't that the whole point? Isn't that the argument always? So wasn't the whole point to protect the kids who have a problem and can't get the shot and could get very sick if they get the measles? I mean, that's what I've been hearing this whole time, but apparently it's okay for those kids to go in public. You know, which is dodgy, because you've got adults who could have measles. I mean, you remember the Disneyland measles epidemic? That started with an adult, a vaccinated one at that. You've got the kids who got the shot but are not immune. They could have measles. They're in public, and they're in public with the kids who can't get it because they're sick. You know? Does that... I mean, this is public policy, but to me it doesn't make a lot of sense. How do they plan to enforce this? Well, they say if there's an epidemiological investigation, then if it's deemed that you brought your unvaccinated child in public and they gave someone measles, you could have a fine of $500 or 90 days in jail. I would take the fine. I mean, that 90 days in an American prison for taking your kid out in public, that's like hard time, you know. I would take the fine. Not that I'm going to be one of the people. I don't live in Rockland, and this doesn't apply to me, but let's just say, you know, anyway, I think a lot of people might choose to pay the fine. So what this means is that, let's say there are some measles cases, then they do an epidemiological investigation. I mean, they send the investigative team in there to find out, you know, who had it, who did they get it from, and they trace it back, and they try to figure out, well, where did they have contact? So if it turns out that, for example, a case or a cluster of cases originated in a public place that they can identify, and they can say, well, and your kid was there, your kid who got the measles was there, they were unvaccinated, then they could fine the parents or send them to jail. That's how they plan to enforce it. Rockland County officials considered the risk that this ban might make people who are sick with measles reluctant to seek medical care. Because, yes, what if your child gets measles, you go to the doctor, and then you end up in the middle of like an epidemiological investigation, and then you end up in jail. But there's another thing about this which I find interesting. Who are these people who are not vaccinating their children? You know, who would do such a thing, right? Well, it turns out that it's a particular group. Well, it turns out that largely they're Orthodox Jews from a particular suburb. The outbreak has been largely concentrated in ultra-Orthodox Jewish communities in Rockland, many of which have close ties to Brooklyn areas where there have also been infections. In both communities, vaccination rates tend to be lower, and anti-vaccination literature has spread, public officials have said. So, yes, this outbreak is happening mostly in the ultra-Orthodox community, although it's apparently not officially part of their religion, because according to this article, the rabbis have been trying to encourage people to get vaccines too. But this comes just right at Passover when they have a lot of things planned, a lot of gatherings and festivities planned. And now a lot of people won't be able to attend because they can't bring their unvaccinated children. So the goal of this ban was really to put pressure on the people who have not vaccinated their kids. I guess really to make it so inconvenient for them that they might finally just say, you know, it's just not worth it. Let's just give them the shots. But somehow I, just with my woman's intuition, have the feeling that that's not going to solve the problem. So as The Verge says, is this going to be a new normal? Could this become a widespread practice? I mean, already they can say, you know, your kid's not vaccinated, they can't go to school during an epidemic, which I think is fair. Fair enough. But is it okay to say they can't go out in public? I mean, this kind of like can really paralyze the whole family's activities. Kind of reminds me of, you know, back in the Middle Ages when they had the plague and they literally would keep people in their houses. But that was the plague. Like, look, if it was actually the plague or anthrax, I think this is reasonable. But the thing is, it's measles, and the ones who are not vaccinated, I think their parents know there's a risk they might get measles, and they don't really mind. Okay? And meanwhile, the real concern are the children who have been vaccinated but are in that little percentage that are not protected, or have not been vaccinated because they have immune system problems. They're the ones who are really at risk, and I don't see how this is going to protect them. Like, let's say if there was actually a plague epidemic or an anthrax epidemic, would it make sense to allow children with immune disorders to circulate freely? Like they're not going to get sick if they go out in public? Quarantine, which is basically what this is something that they do use, for example, with Ebola epidemics. Absolutely, you use quarantine. But this isn't really even a proper quarantine because you have 7% of adults who aren't protected. You have about 3 to 5% of vaccinated kids who aren't protected or haven't been vaccinated for medical reasons. Now, I think this is going to be a very unpopular tactic. And imagine if they start doing this regularly in a lot of places. What are people going to do? Well, it remains to be seen how this turns out, and remains to be seen whether it's even going to work. But I just wanted to give you a heads up that this is the new strategy for dealing with a measles epidemic. So that's it. Just giving you a heads up, especially if you live in Rockland. So let me know what you think, and thank you for liking this video. Thank you for your support. Thanks for listening to me, and I'll see you next time.